Welcome back to the Wiki tutorial video series. My name is Tom Albani with Biostat Global Consulting. In this video, we describe how to find additional information when an organ pipe plot has interesting columns. In particular, how to identify the clusters that reveal surprisingly low coverage. Recall from the earlier video that the Wiki user requests organ pipe plots with 2 lines of code in block D of the Wiki control program. Those blocks were wiki_make_plots and wiki_make_op_plots, and both needed to be set to 1. If the user is likely to want additional information about any columns in any organ pipe plots, they should specify a 3rd line of code. That code is wiki_save_op_plot_data. Like the others, this should be set to 1. Each organ pipe plot will be accompanied in the folder named plots_op by a Stata dataset that lists useful information about each column of the plot. Let's navigate to that folder for the District 20 output that we generated in an earlier video. If you haven't done so already, please join the Wiki users group on the TechNet21 website following the links beneath this video. You'll need to be a member there to download the files and follow along with this video. Navigate to the folder named District 20 RI Output. Navigate now to the subfolder named plots_op. Double-click on the file named ri_1_1_mcv_op_test_district#20.png. At the right edge of the plot, we see one empty column, where 0% of the respondents had any evidence of receiving measles vaccine. We see another cluster where the coverage is very low. If we want more information about those clusters, we need to open the accompanying dataset that is stored in the same folder. Double-click on the file named ri_1_opplot_mcv_01_mcv_test_district#20.dta. This will load the dataset into Stata. Click the button to browse the dataset and resize the window on your screen so that you can see all of the rows and all 30 columns. The plot we are examining has 30 columns. This dataset has 30 rows. Note several helpful columns in this dataset. yvar tells us what Wiki variable is being examined. Stratum and HHO2 tells us the ID and the name of the stratum in the figure. Cluster ID and HHO3 and HHO4 tell us the cluster ID and the cluster name for each bar. N_respondents tells us how many respondents are represented in each column. In District 20, it is a quota sample of 7 respondents per cluster. In other surveys, this number will vary from cluster to cluster. Bar order shows us that the first row of the dataset describes the leftmost, or first, column in the plot, and the last 2 rows of the dataset describe the 2 clusters at the far right side of the plot, bars number 29 and 30. Bar width indicates what proportion of the stratum's population is represented by each column. For District 20, each cluster represents 1/30th or 3.33% of the population. The cumulative bar width indicates how much of the population is represented by all the columns described so far. And finally, bar height indicates the proportion of respondents in each cluster who had the outcomes of interest rounded to the nearest integer. We see here that the value in bar 30 is 0%, and the value in bar 29 is 14%. So if we want to follow up on these survey results, making an initial inquiry into the surprisingly low coverage in bar 29 and 30, we can see that they represent data from clusters 17 and 30 respectively. We could work with the survey logistics team to identify the geographic locations of those clusters. We could double-check the paper survey forms, if applicable, to be sure that there was truly no evidence of vaccination in cluster 30 and only one respondent in 7 from cluster 17. If the survey asked the children's caregivers why the child was not fully vaccinated, we could look into the dataset to see if those responses are helpful in the clusters of interest. They might reveal that services were often closed or that the health facility had no vaccine when the children were taken to visit. We could work with health system administrators to identify the people responsible for vaccination in those locations and make a phone call or visit to understand whether the low results are due to chronic vaccine stockouts or some other supply problem, indicative of caregivers' skeptical attitudes towards vaccination in those areas, due to some other circumstances or of supply or demand, or if this is simply the result of an unlucky and unrepresentative sample in those clusters. Maybe most children in those neighborhoods have actually received the vaccine of MCV, but this survey happened to find a fewer than expected number of vaccinated children. It is important to note that a short column in an organ pipe plot does not give us the answer to all the questions we might ask. The column could be due to data quality problems, faulty recording, faulty data entry, faulty data management, poor vaccination coverage, poor interviewer practice, or any other reason. But a surprisingly low bar in an organ pipe plot can mark the beginning of a series of questions, but it never tells us the full story of why the bar is so low without further inquiry. And the inquirers should keep an open mind as to many different explanations while they make those inquiries. Just to have the experience of looking at another dataset, let's glance again at the organ pipe plot for the stratum named Charleroi for a dataset that you have not yet analyzed, but that we provided in the zip file containing files to examine as you follow along with this video. Again, we are looking at the proportion of children who have received their first dose of measles-containing vaccine, or MCV, as part of their routine immunization services. Now let's look at the accompanying dataset named RI_coverage_01_1_OP plot _MCV1_09_Charleroi.dta. The dataset is similar to the one we just examined. We have values for cluster ID here, but no cluster names. It would be possible to work with the survey logistics team to identify the geographic location of each of these clusters if you provide them with the cluster ID. Note that in this dataset, the number of respondents per cluster varies from as few as 3 to as many as 31. Before initiating a high-profile investigation into why the survey results are surprisingly low in a particular cluster, it is a very good idea to look at the dataset. If there are only 3 respondents in the cluster, then one might draw an unlucky sample where all 3 were unvaccinated, even if coverage in the neighborhood is quite high. But if the cluster had 7 or 10 or 31 respondents, and none of them, or only very few, had evidence of being vaccinated, then it might be worth some time and energy to follow up on that surprising result. Finally, note in both the figure and the dataset that the different clusters in Charleroi represent different proportions of the eligible population. The columns in the plot have different widths, and the rows in the dataset have different values of the bar width. This is due to the combination of different clusters having different probabilities of selection and different numbers of completed surveys. Cluster surveys that follow the revised WHO guidelines are likely to have columns with widths that vary somewhat. To sum up, the user can request that Wiki save organ pipe plot data. there will be one dataset saved for each organ pipe plot. The dataset will list the names and IDs of the clusters, along with the number of respondents and % of those respondents with the outcome of interest. If the viewer wants to know more about a particular cluster, he or she can examine other respondents from that cluster to see if they are unusual as well, coverage or other doses or caregiver reasons that their child is undervaccinated. B, they can check the original survey paper forms to be sure that data were entered and processed correctly. C, check other administrative records or make a phone call to inquire about stockouts or other supply issues. D, proceed with other questions to try to understand why survey results there may be different substantially from other clusters in the stratum. If this video was helpful, please leave a comment or question regarding it on its page on the users group website. See the link below. If you haven't done so already, join the Wiki users group at the TechNet 21 website by following the link below as well.